Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's that time again, 4 o'clock on Thursday afternoon. That's our time together. We're having a little bit of rain here in Bluefield, Virginia today. A very badly needed rain. And I've been studying a little bit in my researching to decide what to talk about the weather in Burkes Garden. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Everybody's okay, as far as I know, in the family. We didn't go to family night dinner last night at the church because I went home tired yesterday. I don't know really why I didn't do anything drastic, which I don't do most days. But I was really tired when I got home, so I told Jim, unless he particularly wanted to go, that maybe we could just miss this one. It was an outside the church picnic, and I figured it'd be hot. My sister-in-law later told me that it wasn't, that it was nice. But they had a good crowd anyway, so that was okay. My producers, or whatever you call David and Megan, to me, doing this little video, are not here. In fact, I'm alone again. They left early this morning with a group of people, and they had lots of things to do today. I know they were having lunch in Marion, and I know they had 2 other places they had to go after that. One was to investigate a zip line, I think, and I'm not exactly sure what the last one was, but anyway, they said that I wouldn't see them again today. So that means they'll not be back here before 5 o'clock. We've been talking the last 2 times about the oldest structures in Tazewell County, and we've been talking about Bluefield, Virginia. Now, I still want to talk some more about Bluefield, Virginia. It'll be sandwiched in between other things, and I just want to tell you that when Mr. Woodard said, I would like to know what the oldest standing structure is in Tazewell County. And I've been trying to find that out, and so far I have not. And I'll tell you why. We talked about the oldest houses in the town of Bluefield, Virginia, and on the outskirts, of the town. And so far, the Alexander St. Clair house was the oldest one that we knew for sure about. Well, I've found out since then that we had some houses that were built in the central section, sort of the county, a long time before these houses were built in the Bluefield, Virginia area. So we're going to talk a little bit about those today. And like I said, we'll go back and talk some more about Bluefield, Virginia as we go along. I won't be able to help that because I'm looking out on Bluefield, Virginia when I turn to my left at the desk where I sit. I want to thank Mr. Hodges. Orville Hodges did write to me after the broadcast last week and on Facebook, and I had asked for information from anybody if they knew anything about the origin of the town or when it first began and so on. And Mr. Hodges wrote me 2 little notes, and I really appreciate that. I'm going to ask that again today of the people in Burkes Garden, but let me tell you what Mr. Hodges said. The first one, he said, the town, speaking of Bluefield, Virginia, was first settled, or the first dwellings, impermanent as they were, I'm sure, were fur traders. I had never heard that before. I have tried repeatedly to answer Mr. Hodges on Facebook, and I have not been able to get through to him. So I hope he's watching today so that he will know how much I appreciate his contacting me. The second little message he sent me said that the Lee Theater on Virginia Avenue was 2 doors down from the Chicago House Furnishing Company. Now, I can remember the theater building still being there when we moved here in 1958, but of course it was empty, as well as I remember at that time. It seems to me that there's a possibility somebody had a dance studio in it at one time in the early days, but I'm not sure about that. Anyway, I didn't know the name of the theater, and he said it was the Lee Theater. I don't know if a family named Lee owned it and operated it. I don't know anything else about it, and if anybody does know anything else about it, I'd appreciate you letting me know. And I really do appreciate you, Mr. Hodges, if you're watching, for responding to me, and I hope you'll be the first of many who will do that. Perhaps you've broken the ice and other people will write to me now and tell me about things that they know. When I started thinking about what I was going to talk about today, I thought first about the weather, because we've been needing rain so badly and we were getting some. I guess that's why I thought about it. You know, we changed the flower bed at my house in the backyard, and we haven't been able to set out any flowers in it because it has been so dry that I knew they wouldn't live if I did set them out, even if Jim watered them every day or 2 times a day or whatever. It's just been really warm. So I hope the ones I have that we saved from the old flower bed will live. I know the things like peonies, the ones with rhizomes, I know they'll live. The tiger lily, I hope, and the old-timey daylilies that you see on the side of the road everywhere. I've got some of those, and I want to keep a start of them if I can. Since I decided to talk about Burkes Garden, because I found that there were homes there that were built much earlier than the ones here, and I'm trying to get information about the older homes in the county, the older structures still standing. I've heard all kinds of tales about weather in Burkes Garden. I looked on the computer about the weather today, and there's very little difference in the weather and what it says is going on in the weather today in Bluefield, Virginia, and in Burkes Garden. We have about the same temperature. I think it said their high was supposed to be 73 and ours 72 today. There's like from a 40 to an 80% chance of rain, and cloudy, possible thunderstorms, just very, very much the same in Burkes Garden and in Bluefield, Virginia. Now, I know that is not always so. So I read an article. I don't even remember who wrote this, and I should have written that down. But anyway, I read an article that was written about Burkes Garden that said about the weather. It's either cool or teeth-chattering cold. The average annual temperature is 50 degrees. Now, if the average annual temperature is 50 degrees, that means there's some really cold weather over there. And normally, I think I'm right when I tell you this, it's a little cooler in Burkes Garden than it is here. And I think maybe that's why, one of the reasons people like it so well over there. There's a lot of people living over there who have roots in the garden, but there's a lot of newcomers that live over there. And several people have made it like a summer home. And of course, the people who live there permanently would rather they didn't do that. They would rather they stayed and became neighbors and friends. But there's a lot of retirees living in Burkes Garden. And I don't know whether I would like to do that or not, because it's still, even though They now have all kinds of communication that they didn't have, of course, for many, many years because of their isolation. They now have, excuse me, all kinds of outside communication. But there's still only one way in and out. Still only one paved road in and out. David told me that the road that my daughter and I went on that comes out over at Bastion in Bland County has been improved a great deal, and that it's easy to drive on now. It still has to be curvy like it was, and you cross the mountain, because you can't change that even if you do improve the road. So if you have a four-wheel drive, I expect it would be easy to go out the other way that comes out in Bastion, but the only paved road goes from Route 61 just outside of Tazewell across the mountain to Burkes Garden. This same article that talked about how cold it was over there said that they had a fairly significant amount of snow. And one resident said in this article that there was one time that the snow was so high it wasn't worth the effort to get out. So he just stayed home. Now, Charlotte Whitted is a resident of Burkes Garden. She's become a friend since I've been working for Tazewell County. She moved there on a farm, and then I don't know how many years she was there before she became the director of the Crab Orchard Museum. She's been there for a long time. Anyway, they quoted her in this article, and she said a part of the lure of living in Burkes Garden is that something unpredictable could happen anytime, and that includes the weather. You never know just what you're going to get, she said. There's always tales of somebody's chicken house blowing away, or the roof off their house blowing away. And another resident said, I never got to town much when I was little. In fact, I didn't even know where town was. That's how isolated Burkes Garden was when it was first settled. Do you know what? I didn't either. I've told you before that I grew up on Bradshaw Mountain in McDowell County, and I was born in 1934, and the road across Bradshaw Mountain, Route 83, wasn't paved. It wasn't paved until about 38 or 39. I can't remember when it wasn't paved. But when my mother went to school at Yeager and had to ride off the mountain into Yeager, it wasn't paved. It was a dirt road then. And so it wasn't paved until the late 30s. And when I was going to grade school, at the little one-room school on the mountain, I don't remember even, I think I knew where Bradshaw was. It's about 6 miles from there, and I'm sure it was I know, you wouldn't even call it a town, hardly, what it was when I was growing up. They did have a theater, and there was a car dealership. I'm not sure that there was even a drugstore at that time. There was a department store, and there was a grocery store, but I had no idea where the county seat was. I didn't know anything about Welch. I didn't know anything about Yeager, where I would eventually go to high school. I mean, we lived up on top of a mountain, and most people didn't even have a car, and while Daddy was gone to the war, we didn't have one. I remember going to the movies one time while Daddy was gone. Maybe 2 times while Daddy was gone. And that was from 43 to 45. So when I went on the bus to Yeager the first day to high school, I'm sure that was the first time I'd ever been to Yeager. I had been to Bradshaw, but Yeager was almost 20 miles away. Can't very well walk 20 miles now, can you? this when I read this, it reminded me of how it was on Bradshaw Mountain where I grew up. There was an article that said in the immediate post-war years, Burkes Garden grew, and they had a high school. They had their own post office. Eventually, they had their own, we know that eventually they had their own telephone company because they couldn't get the phone company to come over there to give them service. Now, that building that they built for the high school is still standing. And I believe that I'm not sure which school it is, but the Amish people have been using one. And I wished, after I decided I would talk about Burkes Garden today, that I had done a little bit more researching, because I know I heard somebody say that the Amish people who were running the general store and had such good food for lunch were anticipating selling the place. I know I heard somebody say that, but I didn't check it out. So if you go over there, you'll have to check it out to see for sure. I hope, if that is true, that somebody buys it that will keep it open, because that was the only place over there that you could get something to eat. And it was a great place to get something to eat. This person who wrote this article about the things that they had right after the war said that many of the teachers grew up in Burkes Garden, and many of the rest of them married into Burkes Garden. It used to be said that the only way you could get a piece of land in Burkes Garden was to inherit it or marry it. And that was very true. That is not true today, and hasn't been for a long time. We've talked about the Biltmore Mansion, that it might have been built in Burkes Garden if the gentleman could have bought the whole garden, and he couldn't do that, and he wanted the whole thing. And if you go to the Biltmore Mansion, which is in Asheville, North Carolina, and see how much land he has down there, you can understand that he would have needed the whole garden to build his summer residence, which is what he did. Now, he built a railroad, and so he could bring equipment and materials in to build the Biltmore Mansion. Mr. Vanderbilt did. Wonder how he would have gotten a railroad into Burkes Garden. Would he have tunneled the mountain? He would have about had to, seems to me, because the garden is surrounded completely by Garden Mountain. Well, be that as it may, he couldn't buy it, and he went on to North Carolina and bought the property where he put the Biltmore. The gentleman who was talking about how hard it was to get out of the garden at times, back when even when there was a larger population and they had their own high school and everything, he said only one person for several years drove regularly out of the garden every day. I bet he had some trouble getting across that road. One person coming out of there. I'm sure the road wasn't kept clear for one person, or I don't think it was. Anyway, things have changed in the garden a great deal. I think I've told you before that I flew over it. My son, when he was a student pilot many years ago, took me over it, and it was so green that it reminded me of Ireland, because by that time I had been to Ireland, and flying over it, you know, the green is so green it almost hurts your eyes, and that's the way Burkes Garden is. But you know, the weather in Burkes Garden can be, I don't know exactly what the word is, not threatening, fickle. I guess fickle is the word I want to use, because like Charlotte said, you never know what you're going to get. And once upon a time, probably in the late 50s, early 60s, one of my husband's bosses was a pilot. He lived in Ohio, and his brother lived in Bluefield, West Virginia, and he was flying up. He flew his own plane. He was flying up here, and over Burkes Garden, his plane iced up, and he had to sit down in Burkes Garden. And I remember that Jim had a company car, and he drove that car down and picked up Mr. Fred Leckie and his family and brought them back to Bluefield to his brother's house, Mr. W.H. Leckie's house. So that day, the weather was fickle. I'm sure that Fred would never have left Ohio in that plane if he thought he was going to run into ice and have to sit down in Burkes Garden. But that's just an example that I personally know about where the weather can be fickle. Now, there's a camel farm in Burkes Garden now. I think his name is pronounced Jergelski, and I believe he's an emergency room doctor. But anyway, he has Bactrian camels. Those are the camels with 2 humps. And he has, I'm not sure how many, I think somebody said about 40. But he calls his farm the Lost World Ranch because it's remote and because he has a herd of camels. Then he called it a ranch. So I don't think that he's there all the time, but I think he's still maybe makes appointments with groups or something to come in and see the camels. But anyway, there's some artifacts in the museum where Charlotte Whitted is the director that came from Burkes Garden. Many of you may have heard the story of the varmint, which was a coyote. I've never heard a coyote in the wild, but I've heard all kinds of stories about their sounding eerie. But this coyote was a wily coyote, and it's said that they estimate he killed over 400 sheep in Burkes Garden, and nobody could catch him or kill him. I don't really know what the situation was, if people were shooting at him and missing him, or if he was smart enough to hide till they couldn't find him. I don't know what. But anyhow, a professional hunter finally found him and killed him. And he's stuffed at the museum, at the Crab Orchard Museum. And one of the things that a lot of people like to see when they go there, they also have a run in Burkes Garden called the Varmint Run because of him. And that's well known in more than just Virginia. People come from other states to run in that marathon or whatever you call it. Like I said, I'm not sure about the Amish, so I'm not going to even talk about them because I'm not sure that they're still over there. And I hope that I haven't said something that's wrong about them. One of the people that gave quotes to these people writing the articles also said that one thing that hasn't changed in Burkes Garden, even with all of the influx of new people, out-of-state people, that they're still a close-knit community, that they still take care of each other, and that there are a lot of retirees that live over there. Like I said, I don't think I would like to live over there because I'm chicken about trying to be on bad roads in the wintertime. Now let's talk about some of the dwellings in Burkes Garden. If there are some of you who live in Burkes Garden who have ties to the early beginnings of Burkes Garden, and you know something about either the residences I mentioned or any other resident or structure in Burkes Garden that would have been built before 1812, then I would appreciate it if you would let me know. They say the earliest dwellings were probably, and more than likely they were, log houses, some of them with were a story and a half, and some of them were 2 stories. The Bailey log cabin, which was built in what is now Bluefield, West Virginia, when it was first built, and it's out on the Sanders House property now, it was a story and a half, actually is what it was, like a cracker box. It didn't have any porch or anything, just had a stoop on it. It wasn't built back just exactly like it was, but it still has most of the logs are the original logs that's in it, and it's worth going to see. We know that James Burke was the first white man. Burkes Garden was inhabited by Indians. We honestly took it away from them, us white folks did. That still distresses me, that we did that. That's a blot on the white man in the United States, that we took the land from the Native Americans. And there were many of them in the garden. It was a good place. It was a good place to live, fertile soils and plenty of game. So we took it from them. That's exactly what we did. But James Burke Burkes was the first white man that was over there, and he did build a cabin, and he did live there for a while. He didn't stay a long time, but he did live there for a while. Now, that was in the 1750s. The first record that I can find of a house that's still standing anyway, and I guess people don't write stories about dwellings that no longer exist. The first one that I could find was built in 1812, and it's called the Peter Ghost House. It's still standing. It's for sale right now. It has 56 acres of land. When it was built of quarried limestone. In other words, limestone that was cut into blocks. And they've started, that house is still there. You can see a picture of it if you go on the computer or go on the net and ask and put in the Peter Ghost House at Burkes Garden. There's a picture of it that you can see. The limestone house then was added onto by a brick house, and that house has up-to-date bathrooms and things like that in it. But the old house, the one that was built in 1812, doesn't have those kind of amenities, and I don't know what they're going to do about it. Well, I guess it'll be according to who buys it, because it is for sale. The Ghostes were an old family in Burkes Garden. They had a mill. And you can, I traced back about 3 or 4 generations from Peter Ghost, who built this house that I'm talking about, and they were there in Burkes Garden. So they were absolutely some of the first people to settle in Burkes Garden. It's the only stone dwelling standing in the garden, and is undoubtedly one of the oldest structures there. They built a small addition in the rear, and they put a front porch on it. That's the only thing on the outside that they've done differently to change. But they built the whole brick structure, and I don't have a date on that. I don't know when they did that, but it's a little bit strange looking, because one side of it is the stone, the quarried stone, and the other, it almost the same size. The other is brick. But they have different kinds of windows and everything. I'd love to go see it. And maybe I can find somebody that'd be interested in buying it, and we could go down and look at it. I'm sure the brick part of it would be a wonderful place to live, and then you could redo the stone part of it, and you could probably put them together and have a big house. But it's on Ghost Mill Road in Burkes Garden. There's another house not too far away called the Fayette Wynn House. Now, it's supposed to have been built in the late 1820s, so that makes it older than our old houses in Bluefield, Virginia. It was frame and, well, it is, it's still standing, frame and log. It has the long front porch that was put on it in the late 1800s. They have a log spring house and a strangely roofed barn and a corn crib that were added in the late 1800s. I didn't find anything about it being for sale. But the other house that I wanted to tell you about is called, it's on the John Ratliff farm, but it's called, I was saying Henniger, and I just remembered that there's some people who live in Bluefield who had a student at Graham when I was there whose name is Henniger. And I wonder if this might not be the same name. I have no idea where the Hennigers came from. And they may be from Burkes Garden. I can't even remember. There's twin girls, and one of them married a Henniger, and one of them married, Sam. He's a contractor. I can't remember. Please excuse me. But anyway, that may be the name. You know how names change from the time people come to this country to give it 100 years, and or maybe give it 10 years, and their name may be totally different from what it was when they came to these shores. On this house, on this property, there's a brick farmhouse, and in the article it says a brick farmhouse of some sophistication. They describe when they request historic listing for these houses. I honestly don't know who writes those applications, but they word them like maybe that things would have been worded a long time ago, and maybe that's appropriate. The Hennigers or the Hennigers, whatever their name is, they all went to Utah. There was a big family of the father of the one that lived in this house I'm telling you about, and only one son stayed here, and that was Samuel Thomas, and all the rest of them went to Utah. There were Mormon ministers or whatever they call themselves in the Mormon church that converted, I guess would be the word, Mr. Henniger to the Mormon faith, and he was a very strong Mormon. They were very generous, hospitable people when they lived in Burkes Garden, and then I read an article about them after they moved to Utah, and they continued their ways there. They said their house was always open to strangers and so on, so they were evidently a fine Mormon family. But only the one was left here. So it'll be fun to find out if he's related to the Hennigers that I know. I think it's about time I left, or about time you left. I had these are post-it notes, and my boss fusses at me because I write small on these post-it notes, and he says I can't read anything you write. So I've learned to type most of what I hand in to him, because that's the one difference in mine and my daughter's handwriting. The way she makes her letters and everything is a great deal like mine, but it's larger than mine. My sister Violet, who was left-handed, wrote just like me, but her handwriting was larger than mine. And as I've gotten older, it seems like it's gotten smaller. Maybe I'm too lazy to write, I don't know. But I still write just like my mom. I could still forge her name if I had to, but I won't, I promise you. I wouldn't have any reason to anyway. I thank you for tuning in today. And I hope that if you haven't seen all the broadcasts that we've done, that you'll go back and look at them. But don't pay any attention to how much older I've gotten in the last year. Please. Just don't pay any attention. Please take good care of yourselves. Love each other. and praise the Lord for every day you have on this earth. Have a wonderful family life and go to church Sunday. If the Lord's willing, I'll be back next Thursday. Yes, that's right. I will be back next Thursday. But the next day, I'll be going to North Carolina for my youngest grandson's wedding on Saturday, the 5th. But I won't have to miss work on Thursday because we're not going until Friday morning. And I'll have that tale to tell you about, Lord willing, when I get back. Believe me, honestly, I love you, every last one of you. Goodbye.